everybody, I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today's video is gun. What it means to carry a firearm. This is concealed carry primer. Essentially, I went and took my renewal class for my own concealed carry permit, a CCW, carry concealed weapon. Other states call it different things, but essentially, it's all the same thing. Essentially, some states you can open carry, which is basically, where the gun is visible, on a holster, usually on the hip. And then basically there's concealed carry. And, the Second Amendment makes it pretty clear that, people should be allowed to do both. But the way that it works out in reality is that the states and the counties and the cities as well, they regulate who is able to carry a firearm concealed. In California, open carry, I believe, is not legal. Even if it was, somebody open carrying in California Californians would generally freak out, a good portion of them, not all of them. There's a lot of conservatives in California. We've just completely been drowned out by, endless waves of immigration, legal and otherwise, and basically it's like a self-revulsion in the culture, this kind of cultural Marxism of deconstruction of the American identity. And a lot of the conservatives, they kind of went along with it to a large degree. But for a long time California was a Republican state, and now our best shot, as I've detailed many times and as it says on my hat, is the state of Jefferson, is in decentralization and secession. Not necessarily secession from the United States, but secession from California, and establishing a new principality that will more effectively represent the constituents living in those areas. And again, we may take part of Oregon with us. They're pretty much in the same boat in a large degree, but Oregon has just a lot more positives. But then again, you look at Portland and you see that basically for all the positives in Oregon, they've got, just as much social corrosion and rot and degeneracy as well. And, I actually kind of liked Portland when I visited it. I was definitely more of an anarchist-minded person back then, and definitely didn't self-ascribe the term of, conservative. But there's the psychological value of the liberal mindset in the sense of being willing to experiment with new things. And that's what some scientists have shown, that among people who are innovators and visionaries, they tend to be on the more liberal side. They tend not to respect traditions as heavily as others, and that is the source of their willingness to innovate. And so there's something to be said about that. And again, back when I consider myself a liberal, that's, in the sense of the word, it means free. Like liberal, detached from politics, means with gratuitousness, generously, right? To be liberal with your spending is to spend a lot of money. And, but it implies a freedom and a plenishment of energy within. And so, basically there's something about carrying a weapon. I think it goes from ancient times, the aspect of the warrior and the person who basically who takes that leading edge in society and promotes basically the protection of the society and the values of the society. In the biological analogy, which I'm fond of using, right, the immune cells and the red blood cells, right, those who are fulfilling the actual operations of this great being that is creation and the human species and biology in general, and everything is just spheres within spheres within spheres, and spirals within spirals, more accurately, all united in the ether. And all of this physical manifestation, both seen and unseen, is just ripples on the ether. It's just different coordination of different basic fundamental particles organizing energy within an etheric matrix, right? It is not that space-time bends. It is that basically the ether exists and there is differential etheric torsion and thus energy flow, and that is what we know as gravity, and that is what we know as electricity and electromagnetism, right? Magnetism Ken Wheeler, again, is just a fantastic man. His channels are just so illuminating, and when it comes to field theory and just explaining you kind of have to get used to his vocabulary. You think basically I'm, kind of big worded. I use a lot of $10 words. He's a very literate person, right? Knows many ancient languages. And, knowing, again, the ancient languages, knowing the ancient values is critical to where we're going in the future. And I described in the last video, of the battle lines of the war, the spiritual war that is upon us, right? There is a very real component of that in the time that, right, in all times, but especially now and in the times to come. This civil war, as they're saying, is going to be very much decentralized, and it's going to be along these cultural fault lines. And there's going to be, especially if they succeed in the fraud and getting, Biden and Harris in there, there's probably going to be a lot more, false flag type, shootings and whatnot. There's going to be more push for gun control. But again, with the Supreme Court as it is, unless they retake the Senate and can pack the court, there's not really any chance that any serious gun control measures are going to be proposed, because they're very likely to just be struck down. And a lot of existing gun control laws are likely to be struck down now that, Trump's 300 judges or whatnot have been appointed. And, as I described in previous video, the magazine ban. Normally in California for many years, you could not buy a magazine for any type of gun that had more than 10 rounds. They said that's all you need to defend yourself. And then basically there was a court case and a decision where a judge struck it down. And then it was stayed, like it was held, and we went back to the ban after a week when a lot of magazines were purchased, including by myself. And then basically it was set on hold while it was basically sent up through the appeals court. And the appeals court, basically the Ninth Circuit, said that they upheld the overturning and said the state does not have legal justification to determine how many rounds in a magazine people need in order to defend themselves. And thus, basically that was the end of that. And there's a lot more of that judicial review that can take place now that the courts aren't completely filled with commies. And ideally, Trump filled all of the open slots so that, again, even if this fraud succeeds, there will at least be enough of a bulwark between the Senate and the courts and a very slim majority in the House. And the fact that, I think, again, as a lot of people are reporting, the left and the Democrats in general, they understand basically that, even if they win the presidency by fraud, they still got their ass handed to them in almost all of the races that that really mattered as far as taking the entire apparatus of the state. And so there's a significant amount of Democrats that actually understand that that the radical left is not well tolerated by the old school kind of Democrat, the moderate Democrat, the business Democrats. That basically there's lots of rich people that are super liberal, but when you talk about actual kind of leftist programs and wealth confiscation and whatnot, it's even kind of those soft types start to recoil and start to say, okay, yeah, this is going a little too far. And then there's Joe Manchin, who's still technically a Democrat, I guess, but he's not going to go along with it. He's a good bellwether of what is to come, and that's part of why that majority that they wanted so bad in both houses is just not going to happen. Even if, we'll see what happens in Georgia. I'm afraid, based on the actions of the Georgia politicians so far, that they're going to just do the same Dominion voting machines and the same rigged system as they did for the original election. And so we're going to see the same endemic fraud just in those results. But this is, again, the beauty of it, and why, I think a lot of people almost saw Trump himself as a projectile. It's like we're just going to send the bull into the China shop, into the ivory tower, and we're just going to let it, basically wreak havoc and, take out all these illusions and useless agencies and regulations and just kind of, but most of all, the illusions, the psychic apparatus of all these things that people thought about America, what it was, who it was, and what the United States government was doing in the world and in its own country. People just didn't really know. They fell asleep during the Obama years. And basically they're not necessarily going to fall asleep right now, even if it turns out to be a Biden-Harris presidency. I mean, again, I still hold out hope, but it is very, very, ominous situation, and we're really in uncharted territory. The only real correlate is 1876 of Rutherford B. Hayes versus Tilden. And, because there was, Tilden won the popular vote, but there was massive fraud alleged in certain key swing states. And so there was a recount demanded, and eventually through some basically congressional back channel negotiation, Rutherford B. Hayes was elected president, even though basically he technically on the surface had lost the election. Because again, if the numbers can't be trusted, and again, at that time, one of the things that tipped him off was like that the amount of people that voted, the amount of votes was 101% of the registered and eligible population. So more votes came in than there were people, than there were voters, right? And so that same thing is happening now, except numbers is significantly in excess of 101%. So in the theme of Trump as projectile, even if this is to be the ignominious end of basically the Trump presidency, then let us take down the entire fraudulent election system and shine such a bright light on this thing that it just has to be changed, and that that the Republican Party needs to understand that we, the 74% who already know that this election was rigged, the Republicans with brains, and I'm not even really, I call myself a conservative, but I'm so disgusted with the just inaction and weakness of the Republican Party sometimes that I am very hesitant to apply that term. But, the good news is that we have a very strong grip over this now. The people who are against war, who are against this imperial program of neoconservatism. And, we can significantly shape the party, but they need to understand that that we will burn it to the ground, or we will take control of the party and we will shift it more in a permanent populist, nationalist, Trumpist, direction, and an America First policy and the priorities that at least were espoused, and in some cases achieved, fairly well, and in other cases, not necessarily achieved as well. And that's where I would be very disappointed, because if this fraud succeeds, because I really think that a lot could be achieved in a second Trump presidency with the existing congressional landscape. Because in 2022, again, there's likely to be a lot more targets for them than there were this time. A lot of the targets were on the red side as far as seats that were up for re-election. And they they know that they're going to get their ass handed to them. And again, even if Biden's in there and Harris is in there, they're going to screw up so bad, and they're going to basically, it's going to be so obvious. Like, they're both so transparently malignant people that anything they do, even with the best screenwriters and scripters, is going to be basically just transparently fraudulent. And unlike the Obama years, again, when people were just kind of blissfully unaware, now basically the rage and fire of Trump has lit them all. And so basically, I don't see them all just going right back to sleep in a Biden-Harris presidency. And, but we'll see. There's definitely, again, it's the age of information. It's the age of the smartphone. And people will find free channels of information one way or another. And so, we see the rise of Parler as an alternative to Twitter. And, basically we see cryptocurrency rising, and, just there's a lot of more cognizance and awareness of sovereignty as a philosophy. And, again, I'm still a libertarian conservative. I still espouse, basically restructuring even the function of governance and government along different lines, and using the tools of the digital age to increase transparency and privacy and safety, security, data authenticity, to eliminate fraud, and basically do to money what Samuel Colt did to personal defense, right? The revolution of the firearm was essentially it was just a mechanical revolution, but socially it allowed, again, it was the great equalizer of men. A 100-pound woman could technically fire a gun and basically fend off an attacker of a large man, or man could fend off animals and whatnot, and could hunt in new ways and whatnot. And there is a certain similar aspect happening with money and information exchange right now, right? Blockchain is kind of the firearm of information. It is kind of, the internet itself in raw form was like the early days of like firearms, where it was all just kind of janky and you had to reload it with sticking a thing down it and, packing the powder, pouring the powder in. That was essentially the internet's first few versions. And now essentially we are moving into the 1911 model, government issue, standard service, pistol that will be used for a long time, because it's a structure that is sound and effective and basically automatic in its main priorities and functions, right? Of, again, the aforementioned transparency, authenticity, security, privacy. All of these are necessary to all of the things we purport to do, in this digital world. And there's so many opportunities for exploitation. The voting system just reveals this in a very just disturbing manner of how electronics can be manipulated. And you watch these videos of how to hack a voting machine. It's like these guys are like, whoa, this is like insanely easy to get in here. And, so again, let's understand that in any case, in any outcome, we can basically keep bending all of this reality toward the positive timeline, toward the paradisical timeline of Sixth World, and that birth of a new kind of rebirth. I've struggled to, finish that term without some ominous associations, but the rebirth of a world, of a people, of a society that will last into the 21st and 22nd centuries. A structure that will be able to be, inherited by our children and grandchildren. And I think that, again, when people see that the only tool left for the supposed economic recovery is basically just money printing, it's just this fountain of easy money, of credit, and it just goes to the affiliated cronies first, and then it filters down. Understand that system will not be reformed, not by Trump, not by anyone. It's going to go until it collapses. So what we need to do is position ourselves for that, and basically just understand that when we build the new world, there's nothing that will collapse for us. It will collapse just for the people who are still living in that world of illusion. And that will be a necessary and beneficial process. Just like illness within the body ultimately is the cleansing out of toxic elements and a response to a pathogen. Once the pathogen is cleared, then basically we can go back to a state of health. And the pathogen is not any, person or group of people. The pathogen is a condition of the human soul. It is a darkness and a self-perpetuating trauma, a violence in the heart of men, that aspect of lead that embodies itself, basically in the neoconservatives on the right, and basically the communists on the left. They're ultimately all kind of imperial Trotskyite, Soviet-minded people who don't see humans as living and with a soul. They see them as just material, as just cattle, and just fodder for the machines that they think are the primary level of reality. Again, that artificial 1010101, right? That's the world that they live in, and it is not the world that biological life exists in. And so again, reattach yourself to the earth, become sovereignty in your food, water, air, defense, right? If to the extent that you are able, I would advocate, if getting a CCW from, depending on where you live. If you live in certain counties in California, there's very little chance of getting one, but in others, it's basically up to the sheriff of the county. So if you move to a different county, then, you may be able to do what you previously could not. And so, It is a very different attitude when you carry a firearm. You are prepared to respond to situations. Your decision making is different, and you shouldn't. You should never go anywhere with a gun that you wouldn't go without a gun, right? It's not that you're expecting conflict. It's that basically you understand that things that you're not expecting can still happen, and that some of those things are the worst things that can happen to you. And in the world that we are moving into, that sort of the ideological basis of such crimes, is going to be magnified, and there's going to be these sort of terrorist acts, regardless of what happens. Again, the left is not going to just sit down and roll over in any case, and neither are we. And so there is this great sort of spiritual conflict that is brewing. And it would be better if we just built a world that is sovereign and sustainable and heavily fortified and defended, while they kind of flail in the wind, trying to save a broken system through more taxation and more Soviet-style, Maoist, communist methods of controlling the population, and thinking that now we have computers and we can talk about implants and stuff, and that's going to make communism work now. It's like these people, really, they're a one-trick pony, and it belies their artificial mentality, that they only have really one way of thinking. They don't know how to even think a different way, and so they keep trying it over and over and over again, and it's just a matter of whether or not we are smart enough to adapt and to learn the game and create a different game and a different board entirely on which to move and which to play. And that is, again, taking control of your self-defense, being proficient with your firearm, being prepared to respond and, protect people if needed, if that moment comes. It's sad that in California it's very much discouraged by the laws. If you do anything wrong while trying to protect somebody, if you don't know exactly what is happening or who is at fault, and you don't, the reasonable standard that the court will apply, there's a lot of people that say they're reasonable, but are very unreasonable in their their hatred and fear of firearms. And so, basically it's important to just be aware, condition yellow at all times, and never being just lackadaisical and thinking that nothing can happen, and walking throughout public and just being la-di-da-di-da. When you carry, you understand that anything can happen, you are prepared to act. And that's not being paranoid, that's not being, afraid or, of anything negative. It's basically, these are the people who hold society together, and regardless of what the world to come looks like, they will be an integral part. So I urge you to participate and be a part of that immune system of the body. All right, you guys take it easy. Peace.
Ah.